What if I told you that 47 innocent-looking trucks, quietly driving through the night, were carrying enough weapons to ignite a civil war in West Africa? That hidden behind crates labeled medical aid was a plan to overthrow a government, destabilize a region, and turn a nation into a battlefield. This isn't fiction. This is the real-life conspiracy that President Ibrahim Traoré exposed and crushed before it was too late. It was just past midnight. The skies over the Kanchari region, near the Burkina Faso-Togo border, were dark, silent, and heavy with heat. For the border patrol teams on duty that night, it was supposed to be business as usual, a quiet shift in one of the most isolated stretches of land. No civilian traffic, no lights on the horizon, just silence. But that silence didn't last. At approximately 12:17 a.m., something unusual caught the eye of a patrol officer stationed along one of the dusty ridgelines. Far in the distance, faint headlights began appearing. Not just one or two, but a continuous stream, vehicles moving in a single line, crawling along the edge of the border. The path they were taking wasn't a main highway. It was a forgotten, rugged backroad, rarely used even during the day, and certainly never at night. The patrol team, TENSED, using binoculars, one of the junior officers counted at least a dozen trucks, all in formation, all moving slowly, deliberately, as if they were trying not to be seen. Why would such a large convoy be out here at this hour? And why on a road so obscure it wasn't even marked on most regional maps? Immediately, the border commander, Captain Musari, was notified. Within minutes, he was watching the convoy himself, his face drawn in suspicion. There was something deeply wrong about what he was seeing. He didn't hesitate. He picked up the encrypted satellite phone and dialed headquarters. Word reached Ouagadougou, where President Ibrahim Traoré was still awake in the presidential residence, poring over intelligence reports, when his aide handed him the phone and relayed Captain Musari's message. Traoré went silent. A long convoy of trucks, moving in the dead of night, on a forgotten border road, with no declared cargo. Every part of his training and intuition screamed that this was no coincidence. Then, quietly but firmly, he gave an order. Prepare a shadow operation. No mistakes, no noise. I want answers. He called General Ibrahim Zirbo, commander of Burkina Faso's elite special forces unit. General Traoré said, I need your men in position. We have a moving target to 20 or more trucks. They're using the back road near the southern border. I want them intercepted. No gunfire unless absolutely necessary. Assume this is more than smuggling. General Zirbo understood immediately. When the president gives an order with that kind of tone, you don't ask questions, you move. Within the hour, the gears of a silent military response were in motion. Special forces operatives, trained for high-risk interdiction, deployed under the cover of night. Units fanned out through the southern hills, setting up an ambush. Along the dusty route the convoy was expected to take, they were joined by a small drone unit from the Reconnaissance Corps, machines equipped with thermal vision, silent rotors, and real-time encrypted feeds. The drones took flight, tracking the convoy from above with eerie precision. From the sky, the scene looked almost surreal, an endless chain of trucks slowly cutting across the pitch-black earth. Each vehicle nearly identical, none marked with logos or numbers. Inside the mobile command truck, operators watching the drone feeds whispered updates through headsets. 32 vehicles confirmed. No signs of humanitarian markings. Formation is military style. At 3:30 a.m., 2 military helicopters lifted off silently from a base north of the intercept point. They were loaded not with firepower, but with overwatch teams, snipers, spotters, and forward observers who would monitor the operation from the air. On the ground, the ambush team finished, setting up spike strips across the road. Heavy armored vehicles took concealed positions just off the route, hidden behind trees and elevation. The team was given a single, clear directive. No shots unless fired upon. The president wants the cargo, and he wants the truth. By 4 a.m., everything was in place. The convoy was less than 10 kilometers away and moving slowly but steadily toward the intercept zone. The last check-in came over the encrypted comms. All teams green, targets approaching, standing by. In the mobile command unit, General Zirbo watched the feed in silence. He could feel it. They were minutes away from uncovering something big. But what no one could predict was just how big it was. Because what was inside those trucks wouldn't just shake Burkina Faso. It would expose an international plot, ignite diplomatic chaos, and mark the beginning of a battle not just for one nation, but for the soul of a continent. As the first rays of morning barely touched the horizon, the calm of the early hours was shattered. The convoy, 47 trucks in total, was now inside the trap. Just as the lead vehicle crossed the pre-marked intercept point, the road was suddenly blocked from both ends. Heavy armored vehicles rolled in from the flanks. From the skies above, helicopters hovered silently, and laser dots appeared on windshields like silent warnings. Caught completely off guard, the drivers panicked. The ambush was clean, precise, but the response was chaos. Some of the drivers tried to ram through the roadblocks, others abandoned their trucks and sprinted into the brush, vanishing into the early morning shadows. but the special forces were faster. Highly trained and strategically placed, they intercepted each escape attempt with cold precision. Within 15 minutes, the entire convoy was secured. 47 trucks, dozens of men in custody, not a single bullet fired, and yet, the real explosion was still to come. The soldiers moved to open the first truck. What they found inside wasn't humanitarian aid. It wasn't food, it wasn't medicine, it wasn't machinery, that it was war. Neatly stacked beneath tarps, labeled medical relief. They discovered crates, wooden, metal, reinforced, each one brimming with weapons. Assault rifles, thousands of them. Boxers of ammunition labeled in multiple languages. Hand grenades packed in padded containers. RPGs, explosives, rocket launchers. And this was just the beginning. Truck after truck was opened, and with each one, disbelief grew. One vehicle was found carrying anti-tank guided missiles, the kind used in modern war zones. Another held shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems. There were boxes of night vision goggles, sniper rifles with advanced optics, military radios, satellite uplink, and encrypted communication gear. It wasn't just a shipment, it was a full-scale mobile arsenal. By the time the 15th truck was opened, even the Special Forces officers, hardened by years of conflict, were shaken. There was enough weaponry here to arm an entire brigade. Captain Kabor, leading the on-site team, picked up the field phone and called President Traoré directly. "Mr. President," he said, his voice unsteady, "you're going to want to see this yourself. This is no ordinary smuggling." Back at the capital, a secure video link was established, and Traoré was shown live footage from the convoy site. He watched silently as the camera moved from one truck to another, each revealing more disturbing cargo. Grenade launchers, claymore mines, remote detonation devices, dozens of crates stamped with unfamiliar markings. Many of the serial numbers had been scratched off, but not all. Some still carried traceable codes. Traoré's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just illegal," he said coldly. "This is organized. This is state-level logistics." The interrogations began within the hour. The drivers, now lined up under armed guard, were separated and questioned individually. Most of them appeared confused, terrified. A few spoke immediately. Others were silent, sweating under the heat and pressure. One man broke first. Shunbap Discampori, a driver in his early 30s, visibly trembling as he spoke. "They told us we were carrying agricultural machine parts," he stammered. "That's all we were told. Load the trucks in pieces. Don't open anything delivered to a warehouse in Lome, Togo." Another driver confirmed the same story. So did the next. It became clear. The drivers weren't the masterminds, they were pawns. But then the questions deepened. If the drivers didn't know what they were carrying, who did? Who coordinated the convoy? Who packed these weapons? And more importantly, who were they meant for? Special Forces investigators began documenting every crate, every item, photographing everything for the intelligence units back in the capital. Among the cargo, they found more red flags, documents written in Arabic, French, and English, GPS trackers, fuel logs that suggested some of the trucks originated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. This wasn't a local arms deal gone rogue. This was something larger, far larger. Each truck had been loaded separately, at different times. They had traveled independently through various territories, only converging near the border right before midnight. The level of coordination was military grade, and the most chilling part, every truck was heading to the same destination, a series of privately owned warehouses on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, the capital city. When this detail reached the intelligence analysts at the National Security Directorate, alarms went off. These weren't weapons for bandits. This wasn't black market trade for rural gangs. This was preparation for something far more dangerous. By the time the sun was fully up, the entire region around the Kanchari border zone had been sealed off. Reinforcements arrived. Satellite surveillance was activated. The president ordered all data transferred to a secure war room in the capital. The truth was beginning to surface, and it was darker than anyone had imagined, because these 47 trucks weren't the end of a crime. They were the beginning of a war. The convoy was only the tip of the iceberg. What lay beneath was far more dangerous, a conspiracy wrapped in deception, designed to crumble a nation from the inside out. As forensic teams cataloged the weaponry found in the 47 trucks, intelligence analysts in Ouagadougou began tracing serial numbers and identifying the origin of each piece. It didn't take long before patterns emerged. Shockingly, many of the weapons bore markings linking them to conflict zones in the Middle East and North Africa. A large portion of the rifles had first seen action in the Libyan civil war. Others matched weapons used in the ongoing conflict in Yemen, weapons that were supposedly lost or destroyed. Some, most alarmingly, were fresh, brand new, manufactured in the last 12 months in countries that are, ironically, part of NATO. A few bore signatures from Eastern Europe, but many had Western designs, sophisticated components not commonly found in underground arms markets. The implications were staggering. How had such weapons made their way into West Africa? And who was financing their movement with such scale and precision? Economists and security officials began calculating the total value of the shipment. The numbers didn't lie. Over $100 million worth of military equipment, not even counting the technology embedded in tracking devices, encrypted radios, and night vision optics. This wasn't smuggling for profit. This was an investment in war. And whoever made that investment had a very specific goal: regime change. President Ibrahim Traoré was briefed on the findings within hours. His face remained unreadable, but his mind was racing. For months, there had been whispers, small pieces of intelligence hinting at growing plots against his government. Opposition voices were getting louder. Foreign influence was suspected, but not proven. Until now, with the puzzle pieces coming together, Traoré knew time was critical. If this was just the weapons, what else had been prepared? He immediately convened an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. Ministers, generals, intelligence chiefs, and legal advisors were gathered in the presidential war room by late afternoon. The mood was tense. What began as a border patrol report had now become a crisis of national survival. The Director of Intelligence, Commandant Ouad Drago, stood before the council and presented the full intelligence report. It left no room for doubt. This was a coordinated, multi-phase plan to overthrow the government of Burkina Faso. Drago revealed that the convoy had been scheduled to offload weapons at storage facilities in Ouagadougou. These facilities had been under covert surveillance for months due to suspected underground activity. That surveillance had now become invaluable. Within hours of the council meeting, President Traoré gave the green light, launched simultaneous raids on every suspicious warehouse in the capital the next morning. Just before sunrise, military police and special forces launched operations across 23 sites in the city. What they found confirmed the worst. In 17 of those warehouses, hidden behind false walls and disguised undercover businesses, caches of military-grade weapons were discovered, matching those found in the intercepted convoy. Some weapons were already being unboxed and sorted. Maps of the capital were pinned to walls. Red markers indicated power plants, government buildings, key roads, and communication towers. But the real shock came when the arrest list began to form. Among those detained were retired generals, former cabinet ministers, wealthy businessmen, and disturbingly, foreign diplomats, all with known political connections to groups opposed to Traoré's leadership. The Interior Minister Oseni Care looked visibly shaken during the debrief. They were preparing to strike from within, he said, not just destabilize, but completely remove our leadership. The plan had been crafted with military precision. First, widespread panic would be caused by terror attacks on public infrastructure. Then, with citizens in fear and confusion, opposition groups would declare the government illegitimate. Finally, using the smuggled weapons, a faction within, the army would be activated to stage a military coup under the false banner of restoring democracy. But democracy was never the goal. Control was powerful foreign interests. Some commercial, others political, had placed their bets on toppling Traoré and replacing him with a more cooperative regime. And they had nearly succeeded. In a move that stunned even his closest advisors, President Traoré ordered that all intelligence be compiled and shared with regional allies. He also requested that Interpol begin tracking the movement of financial transactions tied to the operation. At the same time, arrest warrants were issued for additional suspects both inside and outside the country. The plot was unraveling quickly, but it was far from over. As Traoré addressed his ministers later that evening, his message was clear. They wanted to tear us apart from within, but we caught them mid-track now. We go after every name, every signature, every coin that funded this betrayal. Burkina Faso will not fall. Not now, not ever. Outside the presidential compound, security had been tripled. Citizens began lighting candles, gathering in public squares, spreading word of the plot on social media. The capital was tense, but unified. People now understood the scale of the threat and the courage it took to stop it, because what had been exposed wasn't just a plan to smuggle weapons, it was a plan to hijack a nation. And President Traoré, against all odds, had just ripped the mask off the face of treason. 2 days after the historic weapons seizure and the dramatic arrests that followed, all eyes turned to Ouagadougou. The international press had arrived in waves, and cameras were now fixed on a single podium placed inside the presidential compound. Across Africa, across Europe, and even in Washington and Paris, newsrooms were watching closely. President Ibrahim Traoré was about to speak, but this wasn't going to be a routine press briefing. This was something else entirely. At exactly 10 o'clock, Traoré stepped forward flanked by military officials, intelligence chiefs, and behind him, in full view of the cameras, stood a chilling display, crates of seized weapons, laid bare for the world to see. Assault rifles stacked in rows, rocket launchers placed like artifacts of a modern war. It was visual evidence, undeniable and impossible to ignore. With a calm but firm voice, Traoré began. 3 days ago, he said, we intercepted 47 trucks at our southern border. What they carried was not aid, it was not food, it was not medicine, it was war, engineered and delivered to the heart of Africa. The hall fell into silence. Traoré revealed how the weapons had been hidden under fake humanitarian cargo. He outlined the complexity of the operation, multiple loading points, forged documents, drivers who were kept in the dark. But the most shocking part came next. He held up a folder filled with confessions, handwritten, signed, verified by Burkina Faso's intelligence unit. Informants, including one of the country's wealthiest businessmen, had started talking, and what they described was horrifying. Meetings held not in Africa, but in European capitals. Coordinated plans discussed over private dinners in Paris, in Brussels, and in Abidjan. The logistics funded by foreign entities based in the Gulf region. What had looked like a smuggling ring was actually a military-grade destabilization campaign. They called it Operation Restore Democracy. But as Traoré declared before the world, it was never about democracy. It was about control, about putting puppets in power, about silencing our independence with bullets. He explained that the plan was designed to collapse Burkina Faso's leadership from within, first with fear, then with force. And it didn't stop there. This, Traoré said, was not an attack on just my country. It was an attack on the soul of West Africa. Similar strategies are already in motion in Mali, in Niger, in Guinea. The goal is not just regime change, it is recodify, masked as reform. Gasps were audible from reporters in the room. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, all stunned. No African leader had ever spoken this openly, this directly. He was naming enemies without flinching, he continued, revealing documents showing how post-coup governments had already been pre-drafted. They had ministers selected, they had laws written, they had business deals signed, all before they ever made their move. In that moment, Traoré wasn't just defending Burkina Faso, he was defending a continent. The president's final words echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling. Africa is awake, and no matter how many weapons you send, we will not be ruled from abroad, not with guns, not with gold, not ever again. The streets of Ouagadougou were overflowing. From every corner of the capital, people poured out, not in fear, but in unity. They were waving flags, holding signs, singing national songs. The tension of the past week had turned into something else. Pride, hope, defiance, and above all, victory. What had begun as a midnight patrol near the border had now transformed into one of the most significant national awakenings in Burkina Faso's history. And the man at the center of it all, President Ibrahim Traoré, was no longer just a leader. To the people, he was now a symbol of resistance, a symbol of clarity in a time of shadows. Thousands gathered outside the presidential palace, chanting "Long live Traoré," "Down with imperialism." Torches were lit, banners unfurled. Mothers brought their children, elders cried. This wasn't just celebration, it was a declaration. We are no longer asleep, in a nationally televised address. Traoré appeared again, but this time there were no weapons behind him. Instead, a single object sat on the stage, a large iron cauldron, glowing with flame. One by one, soldiers began placing seized rifles and rocket casings into it. As the president spoke, "We will not keep these tools of death," he declared. "We will not store them, sell them, or pass them along. We will transform them." Then he revealed his bold plan. The weapons, every single one of them would be melted down. The metal would be reforged to build school bells, hospital beds, and irrigation canals. What was meant to destroy, Traoré said, would now give life. The barrels of rifles would become the frames of desks. Grenade shells would become water pipes, and the first item forged would be a school bell, engraved with the words, "Peace is our weapon." The crowd erupted, but Traoré didn't stop there. He officially declared that day, the 15th day since the weapons convoy was intercepted, as National Awakening and Victory Day, a day to be remembered every year by future generations. Our children, he said, must grow up knowing, not just what we stopped, but what we chose instead. The world took notice. From Bamako to Conakry, from Niamey to Johannesburg, African leaders sent messages of solidarity. Mali's Assimi Goïta praised Traoré as a protector of Africa's dignity. Guinea's Colonel Doumbouya said, "Africa is no longer asleep." Even beyond the continent, support flooded in Turkey, Venezuela, Iran, and others applauded. Burkina Faso's courage to expose and defeat the hidden hands of destabilization. Traoré's final words were brief, but they cut deep. "Africa," he said, looking directly into the camera, "will no longer be a dumping ground for foreign wars, not their bullets, not their agendas, not their chaos. From now on, we decide who we are." And with that, the ceremony ended. But in the hearts of the people, something had begun. The celebration that followed would last through the night. Streets became rivers of song and dance. Community leaders led prayers. Youth groups launched cleanup campaigns and pledged to serve the country. The people had seen the weapons with their own eyes, and now they were watching them burn, not in conflict, but in transformation. It wasn't just a political moment, it was a spiritual one. Burkina Faso had been saved from the edge of destruction. But more than that, it had reclaimed its future. Because this wasn't just the story of 47 trucks, it was the story of one nation that stood tall against betrayal. turned the ashes of war into the seeds of peace, and reminded the world that, even in the face of chaos, hope is stronger than fear.